Hi everyone, I'm back to do the 1920 diary entry, and things are a little topsy-turvy today. I did a sleep study last night, which is sort of, I guess, a middle-aged rite of passage these days to see if a person has sleep apnea. And I don't know the results, but yeah, the whole thing kind of discombobulated me, which is maybe why I was rambling more than usual in my earlier post with the 1906 diary entry, and hopefully I am over it now. Like the 1906 diary entry, this is a particularly interesting one, and we even have a link to the 1906 diary entry, which I'll talk about. It's also a long one, and it's also one where, unfortunately, Dimitri's handwriting, for whatever reason, while he was writing this, he wasn't really writing with precision with his handwriting. So there are several illegible words. Most of them are names. He met some old friends. Again, he'd been already meeting old friends in Monte Carlo, and the names just here and there are not illegible. And even the ones that I was able to read, I don't know much about the people. Okay, so let's get started. Maybe I'll wait to the end to pause. Maybe I'll do it after one of the paragraphs. This is the one that I mentioned where there's what started out as this nice little party of the Polovtsovs and the Putyatins, meaning Dimitri's sister and brother-in-law, and Dmitri himself, unfortunately, falls apart. So this is the diary entry for 27th/14th December 1920, Monte Carlo, Hotel de Paris. Dimitri's in room 237, and it is a Monday. At 10:30 a.m., I set off for Nice with Maria, Gulya, and the Polovtsovs. We lunched at the Pavlovs. Afterwards, I had a long and interesting conversation with our host. He speaks with exceptional intelligence and insight and presents his thoughts very clearly. Incidentally, we argued in a general way about politics and about Stolypin in particular. Around 3 o'clock, Ivanovna blank turned up. I knew her blank. She's changed a lot and blank. Naturally, we talked about old times when our regiment was posted in blank. Maria and Gulya went to see the old Putyatins, and I went with Madame Pavlova and Ivan blank to see old Lady blank. Sorry about all this. The mother of the late blank, of course. The old lady has hardly changed at all and is just as blank and sweet as ever. Zinichka wasn't there, just her daughter and son. We had tea, and around 5 o'clock I left to pick up Gulya and Maria and go back to Monte Carlo. I dined at the Polovtsovs in Saint-Romain, and afterwards, of course, we went to the casino. This time we all won a little and decided to go out for supper. There's a bar here called the Carlton, and that's where we ended up. We drank quite a lot and ended the night with a terrible drama for which I was, alas, mainly to blame, though I hadn't meant to do anything offensive. What happened was that I blank made a boisterous suggestion that Maria should drink Perdu with Mimi. It was really innocent, but I had completely forgotten that Gulya doesn't like her, doesn't want her to be Maria's friend, and in short, feels that she is vulgar and altogether undesirable. My suggestion really exasperated him, though he didn't say anything in particular. The only remark he made was that Maria might then just as well drink Perdu with Pete. When we left, I walked ahead with Maria, who was terribly upset and even cried, saying that Gulya was just beside himself, and naturally his anger had come across as offensive to Mimi, because he doesn't consider her good enough to be perdu with Maria. I myself was so exasperated that I wanted to have it out with Gulya right then and there, but I knew that would cause a big drama, so I decided to keep my mouth shut for Maria's sake. I arrived home in a gloomy mood, thinking of how the house in Saint Ramon would be the site of an extremely unpleasant conversation between Maria, her husband, and the Polovtsovs. I should add that when I originally translated this is me, of course, not Dmitri. I was thinking that Saint Ramon was some little neighborhood of Monte Carlo, and actually it was the name of the villa that belonged to the Polovtsovs. All right, so they begin the day in a nice way, going off to Nice and meeting with some of these old friends, mysterious old friends, and I can't really say anything about them, but I can say that it's very interesting. Well, let me just say that the Pavlovs were, of course, and Madame Pavlova, Dmitri does mention the famous ballerina at times in his diaries, Anna Pavlova, but there's no relation here. Okay, so what's interesting to me is that Dmitri and their host talk about Stolypin, Pyotr Stolypin, a very important figure in Russian history at the end of the imperial period. So after the 1905 revolution, the failed 1905 revolution that we've been talking about in the videos from the 1906 diaries, Nicholas did two things. So he signed the October Manifesto, creating a Duma, and then he took on this man, Stolypin, Pyotr Stolypin, somebody who Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich very much backed, by the way, to become almost a sort of benign dictator, taking the government in charge, reorganizing things, and Nicholas wasn't thrilled about it. I think both with Stolypin and with the Duma, he was more or less pushed into a corner. And what Stolypin was trying to do, he was far from being a liberal, but what he was trying to do was to create from the peasantry, finally to create some advantageous conditions for them so that you would have a sort of petit bourgeois class spring up among the peasants, and a class of small peasant landowners who could be sort of the backbone of the regime. And it made sense. It would have been a good idea economically. But Stolypin didn't get a lot of backing from Nicholas, and ultimately he ended up being assassinated in 1911. He was shot in a theater, not unlike our own President Lincoln. And the Tsar and the Empress were there, and the Grand Duchesses were there, the daughters. And unfortunately, they had to witness this. At least the eldest two were. And then there was, in the aftermath, people weren't really happy about the way Nicholas himself had responded to the assassination of Stolypin without too much, without too much remorse about that, I guess. I don't know if that was true or not, but it's very interesting. So Dmitri, what was he? He would have turned 20 that year. And I'm sure, I wish I had his diary for 1911. If he was keeping one, it hasn't survived. But it's exactly the sort of thing that he would have been very keenly interested in. And my guess would be, given his political proclivities in general, that he was probably a supporter of Stolypin. So, boy, would I have liked to have been a fly on the wall during this conversation about Stolypin in 1920. Interesting thing for them to talk about so recently after the Russian Revolution. All right, so the old Putyatins were Gulya's parents, and they'd been in Romania. They'd remained in Romania after Gulya and Maria moved on to Paris in 1919, and unfortunately, Maria and Gulya had one son who was, I think, about 18 months old when he died. They left him behind with his grandparents in Romania, and he died of flu. I guess the Spanish flu that was such a killer at that time. All right, so while Maria and Gulya go and visit the parents and the parents-in-law, Dmitri has more time to spend with old friends. Then he goes and meets them at the Polovtsovs, and they have dinner, and then they all go off to the casino. And that's when this, well, as you know from the 1906 diaries, at that time, when he had one of these incidents where he put his foot in his mouth or in some way offended someone, he always referred to it as a scandal or a little scandal. And this, now in these diary entries, he's calling it a drama. And it's not a little drama, it's a terrible drama. And again, typical for the Dmitri we see in the 1906 diaries, he's not he's not avoiding taking the blame for this, that he caused it, but he's telling us that it was an innocent thing. Yes, it was his fault, but he hadn't meant to cause any offense, and they were all drunk, basically. And my colleague and Dmitri's biographer points out to me that he and I do not have Gulya's side of the story. But it seems like in general, Gulya had been having some real struggles and some real mental health issues at that time. And, yeah, it seems like it was pretty straightforward. It certainly doesn't seem like Dmitri had set out to antagonize him. And I wonder if the visit to mom and dad, the old Putyatins, hadn't put Gulya in a particularly bad mood for whatever reason. I don't know if he was supporting them or not, or if Maria was supporting them or not, but yeah, who knows? It absolutely could have put him in a bad mood. And so then the drama, well, it does seem pretty innocent for a bunch of tipsy or drunk people, and Dimitri's feeling enthusiastic and boisterous, as he says. So he puts forth this idea that Maria and Mimi should drink perdu. So I'm using the German expression here. So most European languages, of course, except for English, in their modern forms, have this concept of the formal you and the informal you. I'm sure all of you know that. You have it in France, you have it in French with vous, and you have it in Russian with вы being the formal and ty being the informal, and in German with sie being the formal and du being the informal. And in Russian you would say drink na ty. And I like the German form better, drink perdu. So you share a drink and you acknowledge that you are now on a first name basis with this person, and you'll use the informal you. And yeah, so why shouldn't Maria and Mimi do that? They're good friends. Maria and Gulya are house guests, but that's when Gulya gets really, really, really upset. Seems to me like completely out of proportion. And Dmitri resorts even to English when he writes that why Gulya doesn't want Maria to drink perdu is because he thinks that Mimi Polovtsov, and he writes in English, is vulgar and altogether undesirable as a friend. And yet he is consenting to stay, presumably for free, as a guest in their house. And naturally, it creates all this tension that we'll hear more about between Maria and Gulya and the Polovtsovs. I mean, you talk about embarrassing, then having to go back to their house and stay with them when, from Maria's perspective, when your husband has just had this meltdown about Mimi, the hostess, not being good enough to even be a friend of Maria, let alone perdu with her. And why would Gulya have felt that way? I mean, what I've read and what I've picked up from Dimitri's diaries about the conflict between Gulya and Maria that ultimately ended in divorce was that Gulya always felt like he couldn't, like he was the odd man out, that he wasn't the aristocrat or let alone the royal, and he felt, that he was looked down on. And yet here he is when the Grand Duke and the Grand Duchess are quite happy with this friendly situation, and being Perdu, he's the one that objects to it. So go figure. I don't know. I do remember in one of Dimitri's was it late 1917 or early 1918 diaries, when he finds out while he's in Iran that Maria is going to marry Putyat, he makes some sort of snide comment about, well, I guess it's just as well that she's marrying some bourgeois and she'll have a bourgeois surname. Although Gulya, the Putyatins had the title of prince. But he says his main concern is that Gulya won't be a man with enough backbone to handle Maria. So yeah, very sexist, but anyway, it is what it is. And now Maria is in tears, and Dimitri is inclined to call Gulya out in modern parlance. And I have to say, if it was my brother-in-law who did that and my sister was in tears, that I would have found it very difficult not to. But he doesn't. He exercises restraint, which I'm sure was indeed the right thing to do at that time. And yeah, it does make me think of the boy we know in 1914, who does have this tendency, sometimes maybe being a little provocative deliberately, and sometimes just not reading the situation correctly, of offending people and taking the blame for it. But in this instance, he's an adult, and he needs to and he knows there are real consequences to this, and he feels bad about it. He doesn't want to put his sister in that position. Although obviously he thinks that even though he is to blame for causing the situation, Gulya is also to blame for being so unreasonable. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of things here, and we are going to continue to watch this situation develop, and also learn more about the various White Russian emigre exile friends in Monte Carlo in the south of France, and more about the life of Andrei and Kshesinska. So do come back for that. I think you'll enjoy it. And so until next time, bye.